Okay, but what I wanted to really start this sort of lesson in is we're right now on we've covered some pretty major changes in American history to this point. Of course, like the revolution, not just we talked very little about the actual war, but more of the revolution of ideals that accompanied the war. The ideas of democracy, the idea of balance of power, of avoiding tyranny, of term limits on leadership, presented by George Washington, things like that. Many, many revolutionary ideas at this time. But we're about to enter the phase of American history where America grows over the next like 50 to 60 years from this like nobody little upstart former colony into the preeminent economic power in the world. And then a few decades after that, the preeminent military power in the world also. But so the first part of that is I want to underpin the importance of economics. So, Ethan, what is economics? What does that even mean?
It's about like resource flow and stuff.
That's correct. But does anyone have a broader definition of what economics is? Like what you said isn't wrong at all, Ethan. Alex, what about you?
Like how the population and the production of things,
The population does what with what?
how the population uses produce things.
Okay, you're getting there. Jason, do you want to give it a show? I would even be a little bit broader than Alex.
Like how money is managed.
Okay, so all of you are right. But I think Alex was the closest to the broadest definition. So like what Alex was hinting at is this idea of economics being about when people buy stuff that have been supplied, like supply and demand, production and consumption, things like that. But like just at the broadest level, economics is about how do people do things? What do they do to optimize their utility? That is to make their lives better. It is just the economics as a science is the study of people's actions in a quantifiable way. So it's a very, very broad thing. But getting more specific to this scenario, it's the idea of people's individual actions. So the clear distinction here, where the boundary is drawn, is economics is a distinct thing from like the sort of government stuff you guys are used to talking about in American history. Like almost up to this point, almost all of your American history education and most of your history education will be like this president, this government act, this government agency, this legislation, this part of the Constitution. That's very government focused. Now, the biggest role of the government, I think, unobjectionably, actually, wait, you can argue with this, but I'd say I would argue the biggest role of the government is that it provides frameworks for the economy. It provides guidance or regulation or incentives or taxation that apply to the economy, whether it's your personal economy, your parents' personal finances, or whether it's a company's finances and their products and stuff like that. The government provides a scaffold and regulation and that sort of thing for an economy. But the economy is the actual stuff that is happening in a country, the decisions people are making, whether which job to take, how much to work, where to send their kids for school, what to eat, what to do for your free time. Even these are all economic decisions because for everything you decide to do, one, there's a cost to doing that thing, whether it's energy of exertion or like the direct cost or the money you spend on it or the amount of cattle you have to trade for whatever you're doing. So there's the direct cost of any action you take, and then there's the opportunity cost. Does anyone know what that means? The opportunity cost? Okay. I'll give you a hint to see if you guys can figure this out. So imagine you have an exam tomorrow. Tomorrow's Sunday. Okay, but like let's just imagine you have an exam tomorrow morning. And your friend asks you if you want to go to the movies with them. Now, what are the two costs of going to the movies?
Not being able to study.
That's the opportunity cost. Terrific. The opportunity cost in this scenario is what you can't do because you decide to do something else. So you decide to go to the movies, well, then you don't have this opportunity to study in the same time because time is scarce. And then the direct cost is just the cost of the ticket or the cost of getting to theaters and stuff like that. Maybe your friend is super nice and gives you a free ticket or something. But even then, there's like direct costs involved. And then the opportunity cost is what you can't do. So I hope you can understand how those ideas, they apply to almost everything in your life. They apply to your job, of course, but they also apply to your leisure, your fun time. Even they apply to how long you decide to sleep versus work, how much time you decide to spend with your kids. Because it's all about what am I getting from the action? What am I getting from the experience? What is the utility benefit? I have some utility I gain from the world. I have some positive happiness or some sort of thing I'm wanting from the world. So how do I maximize the stuff that is good for me while minimizing the stuff that is bad for me? Most people, even though we're not great at this, we operate in that general framework. We want to decide, okay, when I'm deciding should I go to the movies and study, what am I considering? Well, on the benefit side, I'm saying I think going to the movies is fun and it's something that's relaxing and it's enjoyable and I want to spend time with my friends and that's good. For me, that'll make me happy. For studying, there's the idea of like I get the benefit of being better prepared, doing better on exam, having some slight benefits to my chances of getting into a good college, getting a little bit better job, and being able to have more fun in the future. So there's those competing benefits. And then on the cost side, like we talked about, the costs of going to the movie are the direct costs of like the ticket, driving, that sort of thing, and the opportunity costs of not getting to study and potentially doing badly on the test or something like that, and vice versa. So people, when they make decisions, in some way or another, they're usually alluding to this framework of I want to maximize the benefit, minimize the cost. I want to get the most out of this for me while minimizing the amount of energy or time or money I have to spend on it. That differential is what's really important, the difference between the cost and the benefit. So this applies everywhere. And with that in mind, I hope you can appreciate that as much as we talk about government, and government is really, really important, but as much as we talk about government, it is this economics, these actions, these choices that everyday people make that are really what make or break a country, that really are what make or break history. History is built upon the everyday, every person lives where they make choices throughout their day, where they make decisions about education, about their food, about their family, about their religion, about their jobs, about all those sorts of things. Those small decisions add up to make what we call history. They made this laptop that I'm talking to you over. They made Zoom. These decisions are what caused the company of Zoom to be invented. They made this microphone over here. They made your glasses, Alex. They made your headphones, Ethan. They made your houses. All of these are the products of small decisions, economic decisions by your parents to save money for certain things, by private investors to invest in a startup that was like unknown called Zoom, by an entrepreneur who decided I'm going to leave my stable job because I think I would be better off starting a company called Zoom because I believe in my intelligence and I believe in this idea and I believe in my programming skills. So it is economics that is our lives, that is the nature of a society. And it is also economics and changes in the economy that ultimately are the greatest drivers of what a country is and what a country becomes and what they should be remembered as in history. And I'm bringing this up to you now because this period of history we are entering is a fundamentally different period of history than what comes before it. And I don't mean just what comes before it in the context of, oh, there's America from 1776 to 1830, and then there's America from 1830 onwards. I don't just mean the difference in early America versus later America. I mean the difference in the entire history of the world between before 1800 and after 1800. It is a turning point in human history that there are very few other examples of. Very few things come even close to that turning point, the year 1800 about. Can anyone tell me what happens in the 1800s, not just 1800, but what happens in the 1800s that changes everything? Okay, I want you, let's hear from Jason. Jason, what is different in the last 200 years versus the 2000 years before it? What changed?
Technology,
What changed about technology?
the Industrial Revolution.
Exactly. So you probably have heard basic stuff about the Industrial Revolution. That is the big revolution. Like, I don't want you to underappreciate or undersell it to yourself. That is the transformative moment in history, more than the Romans, more than the Ottomans, more than the American Revolution, more than any of these other things. The Industrial Revolution is the most important like thing to happen in the past like 7,000, 8,000 years since the creation of agriculture. To give you some context, I should have brought a chart on this, but I don't have one on me right now. The world did not grow. We're so used to everything growing now. GDP, innovation, life expectancy, all those things just grow. They just grow normally. Until the year 1800, the world was flat. For decades, for centuries, there was no GDP growth. The population went up, it went down. There was no advances in medical technology. There was no meaningful innovation. It was very slow. Everyone worked in agriculture. Most people were farmers. They never really left their like 10-mile radius or whatever in their entire life. So you go from a period where there is no growth, where changes in technology are so slight, where the difference between the Roman Empire and the British Empire technologically is amazingly small given the amount of time that passed. And then you go from that stagnation, that very slow changes in human history, to a period of the most rapid changes. What has happened in the past 200 years? I mean, you guys know, like most obvious things are cars, smartphones, industrial machines, electricity, all these sorts of things, urbanization, skyscrapers, street lamps, not dying as an infant. That's a new thing. Toilets are a new thing. So with the Industrial Revolution, we see an entirely new version of history, one that isn't slow anymore. It's fast. Things change quickly. Things move quickly. So I hope you can understand that important, that vital bit of what we need to talk about here, which is the Industrial Revolution and how it is a fundamental shift from the previous histories we've talked about, either in US history or what you've learned beyond that. So that's number one. Quick number two, is the second thing we need to talk about, and we're going to spend a lot of time in the next few weeks talking about this, is why did the United States do so well with this? The United States was a nobody country. I mean, it was like, reasonably good at trade. It had some good farmland, stuff like that, but it wasn't special. We weren't that powerful. Why were we the ones? Why was America the country that benefited more than any other country from the Industrial Revolution? At least during the 18 and most of the 1900s. That's a really important question to answer. And I'm going to actually pose it to you right now. And I'll pose it to you later on once we've talked more about the substance. So, Alex, just off the top of your head, why do you think America dominated the Industrial Revolution? Why did we win it, if that's possible?
Partially because of slavery.
Slavery. Okay, so slavery definitely contributed in some ways to our early successes in the Industrial Revolution. How so? Let me actually screen share and we can sketch this out. Only the host can do that. Stupid Zoom. Okay, and let's screen share. Okay. Can you all see this? Cool beans. So let us open up our trusty document. Okay, so what have we heard? Why America wins industrialization? Again, the most important period of history. Okay. So one part is slavery. How? Well, part of it is slavery stabilizes the American economy. What do I mean by that? America, I'm just going to shorten. Slavery underpinned like our biggest exports. It made us made our merchant cities fairly rich. Things like that. Improves trade and things like that. It made us have the right conditions for takeoff, for growth, for more rapid industrialization. It also underpins raw materials, because these are like cotton, things like that, which go into textiles, factories, etc. And finally, motivated innovation. All right, let's quickly go through these. So I don't want you guys to get the perspective that slavery like causes American industrialization or something like that, or really like is the reason to happen. In fact, I think slavery in many ways slowed American industrialization. Indeed, if you look at American industrialization, much of it happens in the North, where slavery is mostly gone by the time industrialization comes. Not very much happens in the South. Why? Because the South is stuck on its older agrarian economy, plantation style economy. It relies heavily on slavery and it doesn't want to change. So to this day, the South of America tends to be economically worse off because of this long history going back to success from agriculture delaying the industrialization of the American South. And indeed, the industrialization of the North is a major reason the North wins the Civil War when we get to that. So I don't want you guys to get the idea that slavery is a precursor to success in industrialization. However, it is important to understand the ties between slavery and the Southern economy, along with the Northern economy and their industrialization. The North didn't just industrialize by itself. It industrialized, and a major reason, because it was successful in its port cities like Boston, New York. It was successful with trading raw materials from the South. It was also successful in building initial factories that turned materials into like textiles, textile mills, clothing, things like that. That was some of the earliest factories in America were built upon this logic. So without the Southern agrarian economy being so successful, probably there wouldn't be as much motivation early on for the North to industrialize, to start making textiles. Because the South is like, oh yeah, we can just do this farming stuff, and we're already using slave labor, so it's cheap for us. But the North is like, we don't have great weather. We got to figure out something else to do if we want to be economically really successful. We can't just start plantations here. We don't have the weather for it. So we're going to start being the next step in manufacturing. We're going to take the cotton from the South and we're going to make real clothes out of it. So I hope you can understand how weather patterns and temperatures and stuff like that can help dictate why the South stayed with slavery and didn't industrialize quickly, whereas the North industrialized more rapidly. They had to. It's not necessarily there was some sort of like moral superiority of Northerners, initially at least. There was an economic motivation in the South to not do anything, and there was an economic motivation in the North to actually start moving away from slavery and to start building things and factories and producing things, because they didn't have the weather to have a large plantation-based slave economy. And then eventually that translated into a more moral superiority, but that takes a little while. Okay. And then the final thing is innovation. Why does slavery motivate industrial innovation? I have a question for you, Ethan. Can you explain the role? Ethan, do you know what the cotton gin is?
Yeah,
Okay, so you know what the cotton gin is. Why did slavery make the cotton gin more successful or more likely to grow and be popular and be innovated on and upgraded and everything?
because slavery was like really common on the cotton plantations, and like people weren't really efficient at like picking and processing cotton.
Okay, but then my
Or
challenge to you, Ethan, would be if people were really inefficient at picking the cotton and getting out the seeds and everything, well then if you made a machine that can do that way more efficiently, which is exactly what the cotton gin could do, well then why wouldn't that be an argument about reducing slavery? Like, why would slavery promote the use of the cotton gin? Wouldn't it be like places that didn't have slavery would use the cotton gin instead?
because like if you had slavery, you would make more money.
Yes, so the key here is oh, never mind. Complementary effects versus supplementary effects. What do I mean by that? Okay, complementary effects. It means they work together, that the two things together are better than either of them apart. For example, Oreos and milk. Milk is fine, Oreos are fine, Oreos and milk are way better. Cereal and milk. Cereal is fine, milk is fine, cereal and milk are way better. I keep using milk as an example, but there's other ones. They're complementary goods. I would much prefer both of them together than both of them separately. Like if I had to drink a glass of milk and then eat a box of Oreos, I'd rather have them together. They work together better than they work apart. Versus supplementary goods. One of them replaces the other. One of them does the job of the other. So the Industrial Revolution very much involved both of these situations, where an industrialized technology replaced like supplemented. It was supplementary. It replaced workers. But at the same time, it was also complementary in that it required new workers to operate the cotton gin or operate the railroads and stuff like that. So a railroad replaced horse-drawn carriages or things like that, or some ships and stuff like that. But it also required new workers. So it was complementary to those new like rail car engineers and conductors. And the cotton gin was complementary to the people who operated it. So what I want to draw your attention to is that the complementary effect of the Industrial Revolution was stronger than the supplementary effect. Alex, what do you think I mean by that? Do you have any guesses?
Not really.
Oh wait, let me see if I can get you to it. So, as a hint, the complementary effect means labor, that's people, become more when they are coupled with this technology. Just like milk becomes more when it's coupled with Oreos, a worker becomes more when it's coupled with the cotton gin, or is coupled with a smartphone to write out their emails and stuff like that. So when what I'm saying is the complementary effect that we're stronger together when the technology and the person are together. That is stronger than the supplementary effect, which is the technology replaces the person. It supplants the person. So what do you think I mean there?
America had lots of labor, unlike other countries, which was just supplementary.
Okay, so that is you're getting there. You're getting really close. That was a very good answer. This is a very tough question, by the way. This is like college level econ stuff. So I just wanted, but I think it's important for you to understand what's going on with the Industrial Revolution. So yes, industrial technology supplements workers, and people across the world, especially in Britain and stuff, get scared about that. They're like, these machines are taking my job, things like that. Like a tractor does the work of like 10 farmers, things like that eventually. But history has proven across the world, not just in America, but everywhere, that the complementary effect, that the amount of jobs created because you can now work with this technology to accomplish greater things, the amount of jobs created by the technology are greater than the amount of jobs supplanted by the technology. There's more new jobs, which means more labor is needed, which gets to Alex's point, that America, because of slavery, had the advantage there for a technology like the cotton gin. Eli Whitney, when he invented the cotton gin, he thought it would be something that would help end slavery. What it ended up doing is it boosted slavery like crazy. Why? Because the complementary effect was greater than the supplementary effect for the cotton gin. The cotton gin, yes, it did replace some workers who used to pick the seeds out of the cotton manually, but then it made all those workers become users of the cotton gin. And so you needed even more workers now because the benefits of having slave labor with the cotton gin were greater than the amount that were replaced by the cotton gin itself. Does that make sense, Ethan? Yes? Jason, does that make sense? Sebastian, is that you? You turning your camera? Okay, so I hope you can understand that this is a general situation of industrial technology. They create more jobs than they destroy, almost always. Sometimes in new industries, like maybe not a farmer job, but maybe a manufacturing job or something like that. But they create more jobs than they destroy because they work with people more than they replace people. The benefits of them working with people are greater than the benefits of them supplanting the people. In the South, with the cotton gin, that is a big reason why slavery continues so aggressively until the Civil War, because suddenly with the cotton gin invented in America, the South is just like, they're making so much money on these plantations. They're so profitable compared to many other plantations across the world, because it's not just about weather anymore. It's also about innovation, and they have the technology that is way more efficient than many other places around the world. However, for the most part, beyond the cotton gin, slavery isn't really compatible as much with it. Why is that? Because the new jobs that are created in the North, the complementary jobs that are created, are mostly in factories, and they're mostly in cities, and they're mostly have to do with factories and cities and manufacturing and shipping and those kinds of new jobs, more industrial jobs. So those jobs are very different from farming jobs and pure manual labor jobs, and they're not that conducive to slavery. And especially by this point, the North is pretty morally against slavery anyways. So I hope you can understand that while slavery was in many ways a motivator, and it helped enable America's like slave labor helped enable America's economic rise and rise through the Industrial Revolution, it was not the I wouldn't say it was the best example of why industrialization happens quickly in America. Because indeed, it is industrialization that defeats slavery. It is not slavery that wins in the end. It's industrialization. Industrialization happened much more in the North, much beyond, like it didn't happen, like the cotton gin was in the South, but rail cars, telegraphs, textile mills, electricity, all these sorts of things come around in the North. Because indeed, non-slave labor applications of these technologies is much more powerful than the slave labor applications of these technologies. Okay? Industrialization helps beat slavery. Even though slavery, for some part, as you can see here, provides the basis for industrialization. Okay, so beyond slavery, what else about America makes it uniquely positioned to benefit from industrialization? What do we think, Jason?
What did you say?
Oh, wait, I'll give you a hint. My question is, what about America made it uniquely positioned to benefit from industrialization, to really grow in this period? Lots of natural resources. Okay, what do you think I mean by that, Jason?
They had access to like natural resources, like
What sort of
energy,
resources?
like coal and oil.
Coal, yes, completely. So energy sources, rivers for hydropower. You know, many of these original factories are powered by water mills, and even after that, or like waterfalls. And even after that, you need shipping, and we have a lot of rivers to manage shipping all over the place. So we have some natural advantages there. We have plentiful, we're good with food, so we don't need to worry about food. It's hard to industrialize when you're still worried about food. Food isn't too bad. We have ports, like good port location, so we can trade manufactured goods. If you don't have the ability to trade the manufactured goods, it's kind of difficult. Okay, so there's a lot of things, a lot of natural resources America has that suddenly become really useful in this new period. Like Jason said, with coal, I think it's a really good one, and rivers, probably the most important ones. Okay. How about Alex? Can you think of another reason? Why is America uniquely advantaged here?
Uh,
I'll give you a hint. Think about our neighbors. Are we scared of our neighbors?
possibly.
Okay,
Uh,
are we more or less scared of our neighbors than China at the same time, or France at the same time?
less.
Less scared. Um, why? Because we have two neighbors who are weaker than us, even at this point in time, and the other sides of our country, are literally just giant oceans that no one's gonna really be able to attack us through easily. So safety from attack. Now, it is not necessarily the case that being safe from invasion or war makes you more innovative. Indeed, like if you look at much of Europe, many European innovations come about because of their constant wars and their tiny land areas being pushed up against each other and stuff like that. But at the same time, when we're starting industrialization, when we're creating the foundations of the country, and especially the industrial part of the country, it works really well for us that we can safely trade, we can focus on all that sort of stuff without really needing to pay attention to constant um, wars and stuff like that. A kind of similar tangent to that is lots of open land. Land isn't just useful for agriculture. Land is useful for all sorts of things, because that means more land means more resources, more coal. It means more perfect like the Mississippi River, more water streams. It means access to two different oceans and eventually being able to sell goods both into to Asia, like China, Japan, Korea, India, and also being able to sell goods to Europe. So it opens up more trade opportunities. Ethan, what advantage can you think of that has to do with our government structure? Because remember, I told you how important the government is in impacting the economy. What's unique about our government that makes us well positioned here?
Like there isn't one guy who can just ruin everything.
Okay. No tyranny. With liberty, with the idea that we get to make our own decisions. And then that feeds into capitalism, which till today, broadly speaking, has proven to be winner in in the industrial age. Industrial. Basically every successful country in the industrial age, the last 200 years, has employed a capitalist model. Even China, which is technically still communist, but basically most of Chinese growth has been driven by a more, like, not necessarily a fully capitalist model, but a largely capitalist model. America, European development, um, South Korea, Japan, Singapore, all of these driven by capitalism. China, driven by capitalism, broadly speaking. It's not exact. There's definitely different versions of capitalism. But broadly speaking, capitalism, what is capitalism? Somebody give me a definition. Sebastian, are you there? Okay, I don't know. Jason, what is capitalism?
It's like free trade.
What?
Free trade.
Yeah, capitalism, broadly speaking, is the idea that the market knows best. The market figures out what should happen. No tyrant needs to tell you what to do. No government needs to tell people what to buy. People will buy what they need to buy, what's best for them, and companies will make what sells things to people, what people want. So the market, the decisions, the economy of people's decisions and companies' decisions will figure itself out. People will buy what they need based on how much they need it. Companies will make what people need because they want to sell they want to make the most money. That's the basis of capitalism. Now, of course, there's more intricacies to that. In almost every country, there's really no country that is unbridled capitalism. That's like no restrictions on that. There's definitely flaws in it, and there are restrictions, even in America, which is one of the most capitalist places you can find, even now. But you can see how it spreads from our notions of liberty. We talked so much about how these ideas were foundational in our country, in our country's founding, in our fight against Britain. And you can see how those political ideas work really, really well in supporting a capitalist, free choice economic regime, which happens to be the best model for success in the industrial age. So the most American values founded in the whole context of the American Revolution, of being distinct from Britain, about controlling our own destiny, of being entrepreneurs in a wild new world, halfway across away from Europe, being founders of a new civilization. Those ideas of us controlling our own destiny, of liberty, of choosing your leaders, of choice being central, your free choice being central. Well, free choice also underpins the economic system that works best under the industrial age with technology. So I hope you can understand this final connection between the political sides we've been exploring so far and the economics of American success. And as a hint, this sort of connection is the exact sort of thing you might need to answer on in free response questions or document-based questions on the AP test, being able to connect politics and economics, for example, like I just did there, talking about how notions of liberty, notions of free choice help support an industrial economy, a market-based capitalist economy. Okay, Ethan, any confusions about that?
No.
Alex, any questions? Jason, Sebastian?
No.
Okay, cool beans. Does anyone have anything else, or we can stop this for now? Okay, so why do we win industrialization? There's a lot more to it than just this stuff. Like for example, the last thing I'll add is strong on strong. How do I want to put this? Let's say entrepreneurial. Yeah, fine. Entrepreneurial, whatever. That's not really legible. Whatever. Spirit. Americans are adventurous. We talked about that. That's the sort of person that would even bother coming to the new world, to risk death and take such great risks. They're risk takers. And that risk-taking attitude lives on through the early industrial revolution and helps motivate many innovators from like working here, from creating the cotton gin here, inventing the telegraph. Like America is remarkable for the amount of inventions that come in our 1800s and stuff like that. Even though we don't have like a super established university education system like in Europe, and we don't have all those like established professors and scholars that Europe has, what we do have at this time is a strong risk-taking entrepreneurial spirit. So entrepreneurial spirit, notions of liberty and free choice leading to capitalism, lots of open land, safety from attack, lots of natural resources, and we talked about the contributions of slavery as well as other labor sources in the North. Okay, that's the wrong slide deck. So let's take a break for a bit from what's it called? Industrialization. We'll get to it in a bit. But I want to make sure we talk a bit about Andrew Jackson. Did we have time to do this? Yes, I think we did. Okay. So this is where we left off. So now let's get back to the political picture. What happens with the first 6 presidencies is a very the first 6 presidencies are very elite type people. So like, yes, we moved away from tyranny. Yes, the president isn't all powerful or anything like that. But at the same time, there still is a clear idea that a very elite, college educated, sons of nobility, well-trained lawyers when very few people were trained as lawyers, people who were really, really the top elitist end of society, they were the people who would become political leaders. That was still the relic of the British age. It wasn't necessarily nobility, but it was kind of close to that. Like whatever the American analogous situation was to nobility. We didn't have nobility, but we had these elite families like the Washingtons, major military people. Adams, major lawyer in New York City, very wealthy. Jefferson, very top elite type person, very elite family. Andrew Jackson, the first thing we need to understand about him is he's not from that. He changes that equation forever in America. It's not just elite families that hold the top jobs in American government. Democracy means you can choose anyone. And Andrew Jackson's not an elite. He's more of an everyman person. Now, that doesn't mean he's just like, a random guy who ran some random business or something like that. He was a very celebrated general, things like that, but he rose the ranks from much more humble beginnings. So that's the most important thing you need to understand about Andrew Jackson. He changes the game when it comes to who can lead the country. Doesn't just need to be from the elite political class. They can be from elsewhere. He proves that. Secondly, he proves it by reinventing American politics. Again, part of that elite establishment was like a very elite level conversations, newspaper articles, Federalist papers, things like that, where even the language to us now is confusing, like people who are pretty reasonably well educated, let alone to people who are illiterate back then, or people who don't really pay attention to that sort of stuff. Andrew Jackson changes the game by turning politics from this more philosophical, this more like well-written, precisely spoken, formal, elitist affair. He turns it into a much larger popular movement that is more familiar to us today, with campaign slogans and cartoons and imagery and one-liner, like great attacks on your opponents and stuff like that. So I want to take a step back just from that information. What are the advantages? What did Andrew Jackson add? What did he bring to the table that made American politics better? I want to start with you, Ethan. What do you think?
Wasn't it wait, what did Jackson bring that made America better?
Yes, I'm specifically I just told you a bit about what Andrew Jackson did to politics in America. If you have other knowledge, that's great. But even just based on what I said, what do you think Andrew Jackson did that made American politics better?
Wasn't this the first election where landless white men could vote or something?
Yes, but so he didn't do that, but he showed how you can win those new voters who weren't just elite city, wealthy city landowners and stuff like that. But so what do you think he did? This was it was a work in progress because each state kind of reduced their requirements for voting over the 1810s, 1820s, slowly but surely, so that landless whites could vote. But that really wasn't Andrew Jackson who did that. What did he bring as a politician to that you feel is beneficial to the country?
He was like a poor people person
Okay, and why do you think that made politics better?
because that would mean like, oh, okay, maybe it's a good idea to like help the poor people because that might get us more votes.
Yeah, he focused more of his issues on everyday things that people cared about. He was like one guy who's like, I mean, he was like the first major Democratic president. He's the guy who kind of started, like, okay, what do actual farmers care about? What do they care about? Like, not like what do I think is good for them? It's what do they care about? And that's in many ways a good thing. The idea that you're like trying to do things that people actually want you to do. He's appealing to that broad audience. But there is a danger in just being the person that your constituents want you to be. For example, Donald Trump is the person his constituents want him to be. I mean, I don't know what your position on Donald Trump is, but I hope you can understand that that sort of thing continues till today. In populist leaders, Bernie Sanders, on the other side of the aisle, is the person his liberal supporters want him to be. He's not an elitist, but elitist doesn't just mean like Donald Trump is also not an elitist, I would argue. Elitist doesn't just mean being like highbrow and hoity-toity and British or whatever. Elitist, I mean, it can also mean in these contexts looking at things from the top down, being like, okay, sometimes I have to ignore what people want. Sometimes I have to do other things for the greater good or for the long-term benefit of my country. So yes, there is a benefit for actually caring about what people want done. But there's also a danger in just relying on whatever your constituents want to make them happy right now. You could end up hurting your country in the long term, hurting minorities that are being unheard of. So, Alex, what do you think is a downside to what Andrew Jackson brings to politics?
He has a lot more power than other people before him, or like a lot more control.
Yes. So again, this is okay. That is an ambiguous one in the sense that like, and we'll get to this. He uses a lot more powers, which first I would say in some ways is a good thing, in the idea that he understood that the presidency was too weak to really like deal with the country, especially as it's starting to industrialize and expand. You needed a more powerful executive. That was probably true, and he did a good job expanding those parts of the country's power. However, going in conjunction with what Ethan was talking about, he was very swashbuckling about it. Like he used the executive outside of what it was designed to be. He broke many rules and many rules that he probably shouldn't have broken. He just broke them because they were politically advantageous for him, because they're what the common everyday person wanted. So he expanded the power in good ways, but also in bad ways. Like, for example, by basically like ignoring the Supreme Court when they said that he couldn't evict Native Americans from a certain part of land in Georgia or stuff like that. He ignored the Supreme Court. What does that do? That means it makes the Supreme Court much weaker. It weakens balance of power, separation of power, checks and balances. It weakens that sort of thing. But he just ignored that because it wasn't politically helpful for him to abide by it. So norms, rules, constitutional things, he was fine just overpowering them. He also there's some ambiguous things. For example, an important thing he did was he used the veto in a major way in a lot of different things. But some ways that's good. Like he showed that the executive is a legitimate power in the federal government. It's not just Congress that does everything. The president is important too. But he also used the veto on things that probably were pretty beneficial to the country at the time, like the national bank. Made it a lot harder for the country to finance itself. So Andrew Jackson moves the country forward a lot. he brings about good things, such as a more powerful executive branch, more powerful departments in the executive branch, more federal control at a time where federal control was really, really weak and probably far too weak for the industrial age that was coming. So I think there is a benefit there. It's arguable, but there's a benefit there. However, he also, and another benefit is that he turned politics from a very elitist sport to something that was more accessible to everyone, at least all white men, whether they were rich or poor. But at the same time, to do all of this stuff, to bring politics to everyone, he brought in a lot of the things we hate about politics now, which is the attacks, the verbal attacks, misinformation, lying. He brought in a lot of those things. Not having a spine when it comes to between doing the right thing and the popular thing. So in many ways, he weakened American political institutions by breaking norms, like ignoring the Supreme Court, by turning politics into sometimes a shouting match, eventually sometimes a caning match where you beat people up, made politics into much more of a vile and violent thing. But he also made politics accessible to more people than just the very, hoity-toity urbanites. And in this way, it's kind of difficult to blame him, and in the context that he was fulfilling the promise of American democracy in the way it probably was going to go whoever was in charge. You include more people, things are going to get more riotous, things are going to get more divided. Messaging campaigns are going to get more simple and less astute and less educated. That's just how things roll. And what I want to ask you now is, do you think it was a positive overall development? All things considered, do you think this sort of change to politics was better in the long term or worse in the long term? So let's start with Sebastian. Are you there?
Yeah.
Do you think this change Andrew Jackson brought about in politics, was it overall a good thing or a bad thing?
Probably a good thing.
Why do you think so?
Well, again, it really got it got the people involved in politics.
Oh wait, it gets people involved. It supports democracy. And why do you think that's a good thing? That it brings people who were poorer and people who were less educated. Why is it a good thing that it gets them involved?
Well, having people involved in politics is the entire point of democracy. That's one thing.
Yeah, it's part of democracy, but what does it really add? I want you to not. I really want you all to avoid the easy answer of saying, "Oh, this is good for the economics," or "This is good for democracy." I want you to tell me, why is it good that this happens in the first place? Not just that it's good for democracy.
Well,
why is that good in the first place?
If you only have landowners voting, they'll only represent the interests of the landowners.
Exactly. It makes more people have a say in how things go. And it makes then government policy will probably be more likely to help those poorer people, or it'll help out a wider variety. Okay, Alex, what do you think? Do you think Andrew Jackson's effect on politics was overall positive or a negative?
I think positive because it gave the president more power and gave people a reason to support them rather than them having to rely on Congress all the time.
Okay, so yeah, it gave a national figurehead, like somebody for the entire country to unite about or be divided upon, rather than the more technocratic, the more distant aspect of Congress. You couldn't really debate the merits of your congressman versus another congressman with somebody else. It was much easier to debate, what is Andrew Jackson doing versus what is my Representative X versus Representative Y versus Representative Z and that sort of thing. Kind of unified and simplified things. Okay, what do you think, Jason? Andrew Jackson, good or bad for politics?
Uh, Probably bad, but like at the time,
Okay, so overall, I think the effect of Andrew Jackson on politics, there's many bad parts. Like in many ways, he introduced some of the worst parts of our current political system. But he also introduced some of the most fundamental parts. He realized them to their full potential, like Sebastian said. The idea is that everyone gets a say, even if they aren't as educated, even if they don't have the same interests, even if they are not super wealthy. So overall, he had both a greatly positive and a greatly negative impact. I'd say overall in the positive direction in the long run. He made the country more democratic and more stable, as it was something where anyone could be president no matter where they came from, relatively speaking. And anybody can participate in the political process and vote and care about that sort of stuff, no matter what background they come from. And that's something I think we overall value a lot. So politics, there's a positive there. And it's one that's reflected in the history of Andrew Jackson. However, his actual policy choices, like the things he did as president, not just the politics he played, but the things he chose to do as president, are in some ways more iffy. Made, I'd say, a lot more bad decisions in that realm. So for one that many people have heard about and why many people nowadays really hate Andrew Jackson is what he did to the Native Americans, which is basically he, like, even though the what is it called? The United States had like made treaties with many Native American tribes about like confining them to a smaller area of land. He broke some of these treaties and ordered the Native Americans be sent out west, and relocated. Um, and so, if you guys have heard of the Trail of Tears, that was under Andrew Jackson, basically expelling a tribe from Georgia, and they had to walk all the way to Oklahoma, where like I think like 30 or 40% died along the way. So there's that aspect of it. There's the history of basically like doing a lot of things that were very inhumane to the Native American population. Again, at this time, much of what a lot of people were doing we would consider inhumane now, but these were particularly egregious incidences. More than that, there was the disregard of other branches of government. For example, Worcester v. Georgia, the Supreme Court case where the court decided, John Marshall decided, hey, Andrew Jackson, you can't break this treaty with the Native Americans. You have to let them stay in Georgia. What does Andrew Jackson say? He says, John Marshall made his decision. Now let him enforce it. I think that's a quote. What does he mean by that? He's basically saying, hey, Supreme Court, yeah, you don't have any power. You don't have any soldiers or lawmen you can go to enforce your decisions. You only have us. So if I don't want to listen to you, I don't have to listen to you. That weakens the power of the court and weakens the independence of the Supreme Court and its system for many years to come. So there's that relationship with the Native Americans. The flip side of it is he was very pro-growth. He wanted the states to expand. He wanted to grow, that sort of thing. He represents some of the beginning phases of Manifest Destiny. So that's a good thing, but at the same time, it comes at costs like this. Okay, populism. We talked about that, about much more of that like lying, misleading, demagoguey, getting people to back you up, stuff like that. More involvement in elections, yes, more support, more people care about elections, but also more like lies, more untruths, more slogans, more violence, more invectives. And then there was other sorts of actions he took, like for example, his fight against like the federal bank system. Sorry, is this showing up? Can you guys see this slide about the bank? No. Can you guys hear me? Put a thumbs up if you can hear me. Hello? Hello? Sorry about that. Can you guys hear me now? Okay, cool. Oops. So what I was getting at is that Andrew Jackson, divisive president, lots of good things in terms of involving more people, representing the common man, proving that that was all possible. But there's also the negatives, what he does to the Native Americans, the norms he ignores, the lies he brings to politics, things like that. Important president, though. Okay. So I want to take a quick pause here. And I want to ask you guys, what is it that are the biggest concerns of our country right now? Years about 1830. What are going to be the biggest challenges for our country? We did this right at the beginning of the country. We did this around 1780. It's now like a country's been alive for like 50 years. What do we need to figure out now? Alex, what do you think? What is a big challenge for our country?
Like equality.
Equality in two different ways, but most importantly, slavery. I think
Yeah.
Slavery has been simmering under the surface for so long now. I've kept referencing it under the table, but it's becoming much bigger now. In the 1820s, 1830s is when slavery turns from like it's happening, but we can kind of ignore it in the North to this is a terrible thing and we got to stop it. The North becomes very solidly anti-slavery. The South becomes very solidly pro-slavery, especially with the cotton gin and a reliance on slave labor more than ever. So from the economic differences between the North and the South comes cultural differences. The North becomes morally opposed to slavery with things like Uncle Tom's Cabin getting published, and all sorts of different things. The South becomes very pro-slavery. And that manifests in another major challenge. These two go hand in hand. So we have slavery, which is like the North-South divide, but we also have federalism, the divide between should the federal government be more powerful than it is or less powerful, and the state's governments be more powerful, or vice versa. So federalism is a dominant, huge debate, much more so than it is today. Because remember, this country is built upon a fear of tyranny, fear of centralized control, a fear that our liberties will be stripped away. And so there was a lot of belief in a lot of different places, North and South, that we needed to be careful about avoiding too strong of a federal government. But generally speaking, the North was much more fine with a stronger federal government than the South was. Why is that? Why does the North why is the North much more on board with a strong federal government than the South? Sebastian, what do you think? Can't hear you.
What was the question again?
Why is the North much more willing, like Northerners, why are they much more willing to embrace a stronger federal government than the South is? The South is a much more pro-state government. pro-local government.
I have absolutely no idea.
Okay, that's fine. That's what we're here to talk about. The most simple answer has to do with slavery. So the Northerners have a huge population advantage. They have a much bigger representation in the House of Representatives. Most new states don't really, I mean, even though there's much of the biggest disagreements in the early 1800s over slavery are about admitting new states as a free state or a slave state. Why is that really important? Not just because they want friends. It's not just like the South wants other slave states to be their friends. They want senators. They don't want the senators from those states to be anti-slavery. And so that's a constant struggle there. So there's a big fear in the South that a federal government, given that there's a bigger anti-slavery population in the United States, given that the federal government is disconnected from the South and more northern centric, that a federal government will outlaw slavery or will outlaw the slave trade or stuff like that, and they eventually do make steps towards that. So that is a big thing. The South, the North is more fine with the federal government because they feel like, I mean, like they want to use it as a tool to outlaw slavery everywhere, and the South wants to avoid a stronger federal government because they don't want slavery outlawed there. So that's one part of it. But what do you think beyond slavery makes Northerners more down with the federal government? I'll give you a hint. Think about industrial technologies, especially with the emergence of railroads, stuff like that. Technologies that are interconnected between many states, railroads, companies that operate in multiple states, factories that operate in multiple states. Why does that make the North more willing to have a stronger federal government? What do you think, Ethan? Oh, I caught you with your mouth full. Okay. What do you think, Alex? Why does industrialization make the North want to have a stronger federal government?
Probably so they can spend more money on like machines and to technology advance quicker.
Yeah, it's a multi-part thing. Like some of it is they see the federal government as being able to invest more in like larger scale infrastructure projects, especially like railroads, things like that are really beneficial to industry. But even in like ports and stuff like that. But even more than that, it's just the idea that in the North, the economy is becoming more and more delocalized. It doesn't just operate in one city or even just one state. With industrialization, the economy operates on over many different states. And so people in general would rather their government operate in many different states as well. They don't want one regulation in one state, another regulation in another state. It doesn't help their companies. It doesn't help much in the North. The Northern economy is becoming more and more delocalized. And so the will of people and especially companies for how government works is also a more delocalized view, where regulations are more top down, federal government, then state, then local. So there's a lot of different factors in why the North is more friendly to the federal government. So one is the slavery issue. Two is industrialization changing how the economy is structured, making it less bound to specific cities or states. Three is let me just quickly write these down. Why North is pro federal government. So one, I said slavery issue. Two, I said industrialization, delocalizing economy. And three is not four. Three is foreign trade. the North, as a virtue of their industrialization, of selling finished products, of having a lot of port cities, of all those sorts of things, is very reliant on trade. That's how they operate. And this industrialization makes that even more so. They trade with Britain and France and a lot of European countries. That's where a lot of their incomes comes from, especially for the very populous cities. So it's a lot easier to deal with foreign actors and create trade agreements and deal with all of that with a stronger central government that can like stand up to them rather than a bunch of small state governments that can't really do that. So the Northerners, again, another economic motivation has to do with their relationship with other countries. Okay, so that's a major thing of why this federalism debate emerges. And the North is more pro-federal government, the South is more pro-state governments. Okay. What other challenges does America face? We've talked a lot about the North-South divide, but there's another axis of direction. What about East-West? What's going on in that direction? Jason?
I'm not sure.
Think about it. During this period, what are we doing in terms of like expansion or contraction along the East and West axis?
Oh, we're expanding towards the left.
So, of the big issues we have one, the slavery issue, dividing North-South. 2, the federalism issue. Mostly dividing North-South also. 3, like you said, the expansion issue. East-West, but other divisions emerge because North-South division is really important here because when you expand, you create new states, and the South wants them to be slave states, the North wants them to be free states, and you just have one new state, that becomes a problem. So in many cases, they would only admit states in pairs of 2, because they wanted one to be a free state and one to be a slave state to avoid upsetting the peace. So the expansion issue, which contributes to they're all very related. Okay. What other major challenges do we face, Ethan?
Like around the 1830s,
What?
like around this time period.
Sorry, can you get closer to your mic? I can't hear you.
Like around this time period,
Yeah.
like maybe like Native Americans.
Okay, so Native Americans are still a major force, and there's like stuff like that. But I would say a lot of the major Native American conflicts happen in the 1800s to the 1820s. And after this point, there are issues with regard to Native Americans, but I wouldn't say that they are like fundamentally divisive issues at the time. Like nowadays, we might look back at like what Andrew Jackson did and say like that was a really bad thing to do, but at the time, that I don't think this was really a dominant issue, especially compared to slavery. So I think you're right that it's a really important issue. It's just I'm talking about issues that are not only important to us now, but were important then and caused division and were like a big challenge at that time. How do you deal with it? Like they were confounding to them. People knew how to deal with Native Americans because America at that point was much, much more powerful than the Native American tribes. Okay, I'm gonna add one. Okay, let me I pull the room. How many of your parents are immigrants, first generation immigrants? My parents. Okay. Well, immigration has always been a staple of America, given the fact that almost everyone who lives here now did not live here 500 years ago, or at least their ancestors did not. The immigration issue. This starts to emerge in the 1830s, going into the 40s and 50s, and becomes a pretty big deal at that time. just, I mean, broadly speaking, the immigration issue starts with like German people fleeing persecution, and especially with the potato famine, the Irish potato famine in the 30s and 40s, 1830s and 1840s, causes like tons and tons of Irish people to seek out the New World, because they're basically starving to death in Ireland. And immigration, as you guys well would know, um, it brings a lot of economic benefits, new workers, things like that, but it also brings a lot of culture shocks, people who don't speak your language, different cultures, different religions, and a lot of animosity between the natives, the people who already lived there, and the new people. Often unfair animosity, because natives think that the new people are coming to take their jobs, and they're coming to cause crime, and they're ruffians, and they're uncultured, and all those sorts of things. The same rhetoric on immigration that we hear nowadays, about immigrants, about whether it's Asian immigrants or Mexican immigrants or whatever, different sort of rhetoric, but same principles. Those are in many ways similar to what we heard 150 years ago. I'd say it's a lot better now, but it was 150 years ago. Except at that time, it was about Europeans, like unsavory Europeans, like the Irish and the Germans, and eventually a few decades later it'll be the Eastern Europeans, and then eventually it'll be the South Americans and the Asians and stuff like that, with the Chinese Exclusion Act and stuff like that. But we're starting with Europe. First Americans got to hate Europeans. So the immigration issue. This is really important in coastal cities like New York, Boston, places like that, where most immigrants are coming in. Okay, so that's another fundamental issue. Can anyone think of anything else?
Maybe
I would
some
add, what are we saying, Alex?
maybe like some international relations that might be unstable.
Okay. I was hoping somebody would say that. So thank you, Alex. What's a good color? Purple. How do I put this? Let me call it the foreign stability issue. Because as and I know you haven't had a chance probably to see this yet, but as I've constantly brought up, Alex, in previous classes, the United States at this point in our history, we're not seeking global dominance like we are now. We're not seeking to control everything or to influence everything. We're seeking people to leave us alone. We want to leave everyone else alone. You leave us alone. We just want trade. We want to sell you our stuff. That's all we want. And so what we really are trying to, like, the issue here is how do we best ensure the stability of our economic and political relations with other countries, so they don't devolve into any sort of wars, things like that. That we get open trade, we get to sell our stuff, and our merchants, our factories, our farmers, they make money. Well, not the farmers, the owners of the plantations. So foreign stability. Okay, and then I'd say, and I mean, maybe not the last one, but the next one I would add. I don't know if there are any other key ones, but say these are probably the most important 6. The industrialization. Issue, and I guess I might even separate it into the industrialization and the urbanization issue, even though they're very related, because industrialization causes urbanization. Why does industrialization cause urbanization, Ethan?
Because like people are gonna move to the cities to like work in the factories, and like it'll become urbanized.
Yeah, exactly. Farms are very sparsely populated. They're kind of everywhere. They're easy to create, relatively speaking. Factories, expensive to create, centralized, high density. So you need cities to be much more built around them. People need to live close to cities and in cities to work in the factories, versus you can live anywhere in the country to work on a farm, just because you live where you work. Okay, and we're going to talk a lot about that transformation, the industrialization urbanization transformation. But for now, is there any other major issue you guys can think about? Okay. So I would say, I mean, even though I didn't really intend this to be the case, I would say at the 1830s to 1840s, this is a pretty good hierarchy of the most important issues of the country at the time. Like there's an actual ranking. Now, industrialization and urbanization are going to skyrocket to the top, especially like right after the Civil War and everything. They're going to be super, super important. But before then, at this point in like the 1830s, 1840s, the dominant things in politics was, of course, slavery, absolutely dominant, and its related relation was so powerful, such an important issue that federalism, the debate about federalism, and the debate about expansion, very important by themselves, but were often dominated by their relation to slavery, about how states should be able to control things so that slavery gets to stay in the South, or expansion of states so that we can't have new states if it causes there to be more free states or more slave states represented in the Senate. Things like that. Immigration becomes a very, very important political issue in the early 1840s to the early 50s. In this, like, for example, it involves the creation of the Know Nothing parties, which is basically just a bunch of people who ran political campaigns purely on the basis of we hate immigration, let's turn off immigration. We hate these people. That was kind of the basis of their political party. They did know nothing, but it was a thing, and immigration hating is a thing everywhere. Foreign stability was actually going pretty decently at this point. So yes, it was an existential threat because we really had to make sure we balanced everything, but we weren't fighting any major wars with Europe anymore. The only major war before the Civil War is the Mexican-American War, where America has a decisive advantage. Our trading relationships are getting better and better with France, with England. There's, of course, bumps and bruises, but overall, way better than it was in the earlier days. And then finally, industrialization and urbanization in the 1830s and 1840s is really where industrialization is starting to take off. So yes, they are very important issues, and I might actually rank them a bit higher than this, but they aren't the dominant political issues of the day yet. They're still more at the local level. They're still more just like the groundwork's being laid. Okay. Let's try to actually solve some of these. So, Alex, I want to know, what would you do? Let's just say you're just getting inaugurated as the president in like 1836, something like that. What would you do to try to help reduce the slavery issue, to address that challenge?
Maybe find a way for them to get paid. Like, yeah.
Okay, so your idea is to, like, and again, I'm not asking as in like what would you morally do, because like all of us like would be like, yes, let's like just end slavery as quickly as possible, like that's the correct thing to do. What I mean is, in the circumstance of something you would actually have the power to do. Remember, the president didn't have the power to just end slavery or anything. You don't have the power to do that. So is your idea then, Alex, since I can't like end slavery, let's try to see if there's ways to significantly improve the working conditions for now and then build towards the end of slavery in the near future. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, like indentured servants, maybe. How
So
they
like
work
trying
on.
to turn slavery into something that is somewhat less egregious, relatively speaking, or trying to make have like a fund. For your idea would be to have like a fund to give salaries and like something like that. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah.
Okay. So you're trying to practically address the issue. Like you're saying, even if we can't end the institution right now, because we don't have the power to do that, can we do something else? Okay, Ethan, what do you think? What would you do?
Like about slavery, if I was like the president,
Yeah.
well, probably like suggest that like slavery should be reduced or like not expanded or something.
Yeah, and see, Ethan, that's a really important point because those basic things were not done like in this period in reality. Because like slavery became very contentious in like the 1820s, with the Missouri Compromise being signed and kind of basically deciding that everything kind of like above Missouri and above would be a free state, above Missouri and everything below would be a slave state. And then a gag rule was instituted in Congress. It basically banned the discussion of slavery itself in Congress because they didn't want, they were too divided. So just the simple idea, Ethan, of talking about slavery would be a major change. It would bring about a lot of backlash. A lot of Southerners would turn against you. They might even threaten to secede, and eventually they probably would secede. But it might be a necessary step that you bring it back to the attention, Ethan, and you say like, okay, we've got to draw the line somewhere here, and like we can't just ignore it anymore. So the simple idea of not kicking the can down the road, let's address it right now. Let's try to improve rights for slaves, like Alex said. Let's try to reduce the amount of slave trade that occurs and reduce the amount of slavery. And above all, let's just talk about it. We can't ignore it. We can't just push this down the road. Okay. Jason, what would you do about the immigration issue? The massive influx of immigrants?
I would probably like set up a system for immigration that like doesn't completely ban it, but also like regulates it.
Okay, so you would make sure that the federal government regulates immigration, have some sort of maybe approval process, like an Ellis Island type thing to make sure that there's some like levels of selection, some levels of requirements, stuff like that. And but you would make sure that immigration is still a major part of the country's growth. You wouldn't want to diminish that. Is that a correct interpretation?
Yeah.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, but then what would you do to try to appease? How do you deal with all those coastal like voters, all those coastal people who really want you to clamp down on immigration because they hate immigrants? How do you dissuade them of that notion, or how do you address their fears?
I don't know.
Okay,
Like,
anyone have an idea there? What do you think, Alex?
Reducing costs.
What is it? What do you mean by that? Oh yeah, I'll give you two. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Never mind.
Okay, I'll give you two hints. So the first hint is, Alex, do all the immigrants have to go to live in the coastal cities, or are there other places they could live?
There's other places.
So what sort of system might you create to reduce the amount of immigrants who end up working in coastal cities?
Probably putting either like railroads or making the non-coastal areas more attractive.
Yeah, maybe some sort of incentive to go elsewhere, or like some sort of transportation system where new immigrants are more evenly distributed across cities and like farmland, both inside the country and at the coast. Things like that. Unfortunately, that's a very difficult system to actually implement, and probably at this point the federal government isn't powerful enough to do all that sort of stuff. So my second hint is, think about what the federal government does. It's not just doesn't just regulate. It also educates. It also is a messaging platform. Like the people can like tell things to their constituents. They can try to change their minds. So what might you do for like a messaging campaign or something? How might you try to convince your constituents that they should actually they should be less opposed to immigration? What would you say? Talks, what would you say to your voters to convince them, hey, this is actually not as bad a thing as you think it is.
You could reduce the costs of living there.
Okay, reduce the cost of living. What other benefits could you talk up, like promoting the other benefits of immigration? What are the other benefits you can think of? What do immigrants add to your city?
Workers, labor.
Yeah, they might do the jobs you don't want to do. They'll help you expand the city, things like that. Exactly. So it's not as though you can spin it. One way you could spin it is that they're taking your jobs, but the more optimistic thing is that they are helping you build the city, and they're often going to be taking the jobs you don't even want, and you can take better jobs since you've probably more experience in the system. There's a lot of different ways to spin it, but potentially messaging campaigns, educational campaigns, those could help, along with other programs to help make sure that crime doesn't go up too much, things like that. So again, I'm not telling you things that actually happen. Some of these things happen. Like there were initiatives to have more prisons and more police forces to reduce crime. There were initiatives to relocate immigrants inland and stuff like that and things like that. But by and large, I just want you guys to try to think about how you would go about solving some of these problems. Okay, the last one I'll bring up is the expansion issue. So, Sebastian, are you there?
Yes.
Okay. So, Sebastian, we have this whole thing about how are we going to deal with our country expanding to the west, both in the sense of the Native Americans we have to relocate, quote unquote, or the slave versus free state distinction, all these sort of things. How are we going to deal with all that? And so what I might want you to tell me, Sebastian, is first and foremost, how do we deal with this idea of adding new states? How do we like add a new state without it like being unacceptable to the north or the south? How would you do it?
Well, there were a bunch of different there were like a bunch of different compromises between the North and South.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Well, I guess there were a bunch of compromises between the North and South states about which states would be slave states and which ones would be free states.
Yeah, so yeah, you're completely right. There's a bunch of different ways this was done. Like one was adding two states as one is a free, one is a slave state. Another one was having the states vote on whether they would be free states and slave states. Almost none of these accomplished what we would have wanted them to accomplish. Either in the sense of helping lead to more freedom, they didn't really do that, nor in the realm of helping lead to stability, even short of freedom for slaves. Like you'd think that voting would work, except for the fact that there was a lot of violence in like Bleeding Kansas, this big event where Kansas tried to vote on whether to be a slave or free state. A lot of people from free states, because they morally objected to slavery, came to Kansas to vote against slavery, and then there was some big riots and a lot of people died, and it didn't really help with stability. So there's complications there. Are you trying to say something, Sebastian? Or do you have something to add? No? Okay. So there is like this is probably one of the hardest issues, Sebastian, to address. The idea of how do you deal with new states? It doesn't seem like any solution would really fix it. In fact, probably the only solution that would fix it is targeting the slavery issue head on. And unfortunately, in the end, there were not that many ways to resolve the slavery issue that weren't the one that we ended up having to do anyway, which was a civil war. Which was the South seceding from the Union because they were more tied to slavery than to the rest of the country. and the North having to either decide to let it go and irreparably damage the country, or fight and forcibly remove slavery from the South. So, from my perspective, the Civil War in many ways was inevitable and in some ways was just delayed. It could not have been avoided. Ethan, can you think of any way this could have gone down? Slavery could have ended in the South. I might be completely wrong. Can you think of a way slavery might have ended in the South without a civil war? How would you have tried to go about
Like end slavery in the South without like military confrontation.
that? Yeah, it's a really difficult question. I don't expect you to come up with like a super brilliant answer or anything. I just want to hear what you think. Everyone, I want you to
Well,
brainstorm for a few seconds. Ethan, tell me what you're thinking.
you could probably like cut like whatever taxes they have to pay by a little bit and then say, okay, those taxes we just cut from you, those are gonna be like your slaves' wages, so they technically aren't your slaves anymore.
Oh, wait, I really like the avenue you're going on because you're recognizing that slavery, Ethan, is a fundamentally stemming from economic issues. It's become a cultural thing, but it stems from economic issues. So you're thinking, how can I make it economically worth their while, worth their money for them to end slavery? Unfortunately, Ethan, I think while you're on the right track there, the effect would probably just be way too little because, and I think you probably know this already, like slavery is just so fundamental to the economy in the South that almost any like small to medium to even large size economic measure the federal government were to do, especially the weakened one at the time, relative to now, it probably wouldn't even scratch the surface. It would be the tip of the iceberg compared to the amount of the Southern economy that relied on slavery. So like to give you some context, even after the Civil War and 690,000 Americans dead and all of that stuff, you still end up with like 50 or 60 more years in the South of sharecropping, where the Southern economy still relies on very poorly paid black farmers to run the farms. And so that thing is just so ingrained in the Southern economy that it's really difficult to give any economic incentive for them to stop doing it. However, I think you and Alex are on the right track that probably the best thing that could have been done economically is like some sort of incentive for freeing slaves or some sort of incentive to pay slaves or stuff like that. So that like even if the change would have taken a while, you might have been able to slowly but surely incentivize the Southerners and the plantation owners themselves into voluntarily paying their slaves and giving them more rights and freedoms and stuff like that, using economic incentives. So I think you and Alex have a really, really strong idea there. Jason, what else do you think could be done to try to get slavery abolished in the South without a civil war?
Give them some sort of incentive.
So what sort of incentive would you give? So Ethan talked about tax cuts or something like that. Alex talked about incentives that would promote like slaves to get wages or paying slaves directly or something like that. What would you do, Jason?
I don't really know.
Okay, let's think about what does the South want? Because you have to give them something they want. What does the South want? What do Southern plantation owners want?
Labor.
They want labor. So maybe what could you do to either give them alternative sources of labor or something like that? Can you think of anything?
Like just have regular people work there, like who need the money.
Yeah, maybe have some sort of government subsidized program where that supports more regular people getting like regular jobs there and making slavery both less essential to the South while also making slavery making slavery more slaves more likely to get paid. And on top of that, like I mean, like that's the thing that's even done today. Like, you know, right now, when you go to the store to buy food, like things that were grown somewhere, like grains or corn or vegetables or whatever, almost all of those things are a lot more expensive to produce than the price you pay for them, and they're all heavily subsidized by the government. So today that happens. Like farmers, like farming, the labor of farming is subsidized by the government. And I like your idea of subsidizing it in the past, back then, so that slavery died down more naturally. Probably the federal government was a bit weaker then. It's a lot harder. And again, slavery was so essential. But I think it's a really strong idea. Combining a lot of these things might have actually worked. On top of that, like, I mean, again, I really like that you guys are thinking of incentives to do this. How do you incentivize plantation owners to pay their workers or to use less slavery? You go for their pocketbooks. You make it worth their while and make it profitable. Great thinking, guys. You're thinking like politicians, and you're thinking probably a lot more efficiently than some of the politicians did at this time. Okay, so right now, I hope you understand where we're at. So what do we have here? We've got at the 50-year anniversary of America, we've got this fundamental transformation of the presidency and politics through Andrew Jackson. We have a fundamental transformation of our economy, the biggest, most important transformation in the history of human race, the Industrial Revolution, and why America is good for that. And we have these fundamental issues, especially the issues of slavery and expansion that are dividing the states and the country on geographical lines. So I think we can leave class here because the next step is talking about manifest destiny, and that's kind of its own long thing. So we'll do that next time. But what we have left is to talk about manifest destiny, cover some of the more specifics about slavery and the debate over that, and then of course talk about the Civil War and Reconstruction. So that we'll save for next time. But I hope you understand that this is kind of the story of the mid to early to mid 1800s. These are the issues the country is facing politically: slavery, federalism, expansion, immigration, foreign stability, industrialization, and urbanization. The country is changing in a lot of cultural ways. We'll talk next time about our desire to expand westward, like the feeling of a God-given right. It's changing a lot in terms of our artistic and scientific establishment maturing with more universities, with American schools of art, things like that. So we'll talk about more of those cultural expansions and shifts next time, and then how they all build up to the Civil War. But for now, I want you to understand the state of affairs. What are the issues we face, and what are the major changes going on with slavery, with politics, with the executive, and with industrialization? So do you guys all feel comfortable with that? Give me a thumbs up if you feel comfortable, at least with kind of what's going on at this point in our history with those things. Ethan gives thumbs up. Jason, Alex, you can imagine Sebastian. Okay, cool beans. So please do your homework. Alex, if you need to be on the Google Classroom, just stay a minute after. Otherwise, everyone else is free to go unless if you have any questions, you can stay.